Hero, have you ever wanted to ask a rabbi anything? In this episode, I invite members of our live studio audience to do just that. Ask a rabbi anything right after this bass. That's not me beatboxing. That would be awful. That's just me imitating my favorite song, which is the intro music to the Jew Curious Show podcast. It's not just my favorite song because of that. It was my favorite song, and then I picked it, and I asked the artist permission to use it, and he said yes, Baruch Hashem, and thank you to Joey Weissenberg. So what we're doing today is a live studio recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. We do this just about every weekday these days, and on Mondays it is Ask Me Anything. So if you came to, looking for a particular topic in 90 seconds or less, that's not what we're doing here. Sometimes this goes about 90 minutes. So this is a time to just kick back, hang out with some Jew Curious folks just like you. I'm delighted to learn with you, Hero. And today in our Ask Me Anything session, I mean it, you can ask me anything. You should probably stick to Jewish topics. That's like my biggest area of expertise, I'll say. I'm also good with scary movies and some craft beers. I'm not really into the craft beer scene the way I used to be. But if you want to ask me anything about Judaism, this is the place to do that. If it's Passover, if it's any other Jewish topic, going to entertain those things today. So I'm delighted to see people joining us here on Monday morning. And again, this is a live studio recording of a podcast. So sometimes I'm going to sound like I'm talking to a podcast audience. No offense. Sometimes I'm going to sound like I'm talking to a YouTube audience, and I may cut that out of the podcast. But I like to do double duty here on the Jew Curious Show. So can everybody hear me okay? Say hello, Bob, if you can hear me. Say hello, Bob. Type it in the chat if you can hear me okay. And I'll just wait for that just to make sure. This is a little sound check, a 1, 2, a 1, 2. See what my lag looks like here. That's good radio. Okay. So what we're gonna say, I'm pretty excited. Our friend Carla is here as well. I'm just gonna type in, "Can you hear me?" Whoop. Hey, Bob. Carla says, hello. Hey, Bob. Sorry. As soon as I type that in, that's how it works. It's always in the last place you look, tautologically speaking. So let's go ahead and get into this. Go ahead and start asking your questions in the chat. And I'm going to go back to doing some recording for the podcast. Sounds a little something. Well, I'm going to just clear it out first. You are me. Red leather, yellow leather, unique New York. She sells seashells by the seashore. Rocking it up with some rocket fuel. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble for those inspiring opening beats. Thank you so much to the live studio audience who is tuning in here with me on YouTube to put this show together. Couldn't do an Ask Me Anything show without people asking me anything, so I couldn't be more grateful to folks like Kathy and Carla from Southern California. Carla, you have no idea how happy I am to see you typing right now. And Joe gave you a shout out at PJTC this past Shabbos, so just want to let you know about that. We got Suzanne from NorCal, Kathy from SoCal. So many cows going on right now. Good to see William Morales coming in from Waukee Springs, Florida. And everybody's saying, hey, Bob, because they can hear me okay. That was a little sound check we did earlier on. So let's see. I'm going to wait to do our silent sprint until the air conditioner kicks on. Most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. This is another of our Ask Me Anything episodes. And I am looking forward to people asking me anything. But you got to throw some questions in the chat, people. Make sure it has a question mark on it. It makes it easier for me to distinguish the questions from just kind of the back chatter, which is totally okay with me. So feel free to go ahead and throw those questions in there. While I'm going to talk to the podcast folks here for a second. You may be And one question you may have on your mind is, do I belong here? Am I listening to the right show? And I'll just say, if you are remotely Jew curious, you have come to the right place. You may be somebody who's considering converting to Judaism. A lot of my listeners are, I've found. You may be mildly considering that, seriously considering that, on your way to the mikveh right now. In any case, you certainly belong here. You may have been born Jewish. You may have been Jewish your whole life, but there's still lots of things that you are curious about. Maybe you haven't been in a synagogue in a while, if ever, and you're curious about finding your way back in. You totally belong here. You may not be remotely interested in being Jewish. You may be part of another religion altogether, but you're curious about the Jewish roots of your own tradition. If so, you are welcome and you totally belong here, and you just may be some sort of spiritual seeker. I have been one of those myself, trying on different things, seeing what fits, seeing if Judaism and the Jewish people and the Jewish traditions are right for you. If any of these conditions apply, you are totally in the right place, and I'm excited to learn with you. Just one favor I'd like to ask before we get started. If you are listening to this show for the first time, or maybe, one of the first couple of times, and you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, please consider doing so. All you got to do is tap that little button on your phone or podcast listening device, and you will auto-magically download every future episode and get instant access to all of our 30-some shows that we've already done on this podcast. Without working too hard, you can get all of that just by subscribing to the Jew Curious Show. And with that, I will ask you to put the phone in your pocket. Take a little silence print here. Air conditioner just kicked on. Excellent. And once you have subscribed, I'd like you to put your phone in your pocket, put it up on the dashboard, someplace out of reach, settle in for this amazing conversation that I'm about to have with our live studio audience. And I'm just going to say one more thing before we get started. And that is, if you would like to join the live studio audience in the future, all you have to do is go to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Rabbi John Carrier. That's 3 words all jammed into one. And you'll see the upcoming live sessions that we have. You are invited to join any or all of them and ask your questions live. And not only will you get answers, but you'll also be helping out other Jew-curious people just like you, because if you have that question, hero, somebody else has it too, and you're doing them a solid by asking it. Speaking of questions, I'm seeing some question marks in the chat. So let's see what we have going on here. Let's see. Looking for question marks. Not so much a question, but Suzanne says, thank you again for letting me know it was okay for me to ask a rabbi if I could come to his house for Pesach. If you have not, first off, you are most welcome, happy to do it. Second, if you're listening and you have not yet heard me say this, we do have kind of a cultural thing in at least the United States, if not elsewhere, that it's considered rude to invite yourself to a party at somebody's house. You may feel rude doing it. The host may feel you're rude for doing it. However, Passover is not that kind of party. When we have the Passover Seder, there's a part that says, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. And not so much the affliction-y part, but the, let all come and eat part. That is important. It is a mitzvah for somebody to have you over to your Seder. It is a mitzvah for someone to have you over for their Seder. So if you don't have a place to go this coming Friday and Saturday night for a Seder, don't feel shy about asking around. It's not like crashing a wedding or something like that. You are being a shaliach mitzvah. You're letting someone else do the mitzvah of hosting you, so you shouldn't feel weird about asking. Likewise, if they don't have a place, don't feel weird if they say no. So that's kind of the give and take. But I want to make sure as many people in this audience as possible have a place for Seder Pesach. Don't feel shy asking your rabbi, asking people in your community if they have an extra seat at their table. If they don't, they'll let you know, but they might find somebody else who does. So don't feel shy about that. And Suzanne, thank you for bringing that up because I want to make sure everybody hears that message. Let's see. First question of the day. Kathy asks, if a non-Jewish child is adopted by Jewish parents, how do they convert the child? This is a great question. I actually see this all the time. I sometimes sit on the Beit Din. I sometimes sit on the Beit Din at the American Jewish University, but it's one of the court of 3 rabbis who, among other things, helps witness conversions. And many times it's a short Beit Din, right? We don't have to ask a lot of questions because the person converting is a baby. And babies are terrible conversationalists. I'm just going to put that out there. Don't want to get a bunch of hate mail from babies. I won't, because they're also terrible at writing emails. But in any case, the custom is when a child is adopted, I'll say of any age, that child is converted to Judaism by the way we would normally convert a child to Judaism. And I'm just stipulating children, let's say under the age of bar mitzvah. If they're 12 for girls, 13 for boys, they have a little bit more say in the matter. But, excuse me. But if they are below the age of legal majority under Jewish law, that is 12 for girls, 13 for boys, the parent can convert them. And then once the child becomes bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, they can decide whether they want to keep that or not. But when it's a child, you convert them like you do with an adult, except not so many questions from the Beit Din. And so for either a boy or a girl, that child would go to the mikveh. And if the child is a boy child, then or one that possesses a penis, we'll just be frank about that, then that child would have to undergo circumcision or hatafat dam brit. Now, there are some controversies and ill feelings and things like that about circumcising a child these days. This is possibly the oldest continuously practiced religious ritual, probably the one that I get the most flack for talking about on YouTube, but it's something that we do. And so if the child is going to be converted, then it's going to be converted, as other males are converted. And so that's the general procedure. And typically it's done when the baby is as young as possible. Pretty much as long as the doctors are okay that these things are going on, it's fine. I'll say if it's a baby being converted, it's nice to get them in the mikveh the earlier the better, because first off, newborns have just come out of water, and they're actually quite accustomed to it. The older the child is, once you get up to a certain age, like 1 or 18 months or something like that, kids tend to freak out about being immersed in water like they don't when they're little teeny babies. So the younger you can do it, the better. But I've seen children converted 8, 10, 12 years old, and but it's just like any other conversion, except for if they're below the age of majority, the parent can do it on their behalf. But if they're older than 13, then the rabbis will probably ask them some questions. So I hope that answers your question. There's been some questions lately about surrogacy, and I've witnessed this as well because surrogacy is illegal in Israel. So I've witnessed some people flying from Israel with surrogate babies, having them converted in the mikveh in LA and then taking them back to Israel. But the real controversy comes up if the surrogate is carrying a child where both the egg and the sperm are from Jewish people. Does the child need to convert? And so because these rules were generally made before we had the technology for that kind of surrogacy, by and large, we're saying, why don't we just go ahead and do the mikveh just to cover our bases and things like that, because it has less to do with the zygotes, the eggs and the sperm, than it does the womb that the child came out of. And so that's the kind of, I guess, on the table right now for the Committee on Law and Standards. But it raises all sorts of issues, especially as couples are getting more creative about how they grow their family these days. Let's see. I've seen a couple more people join us. Welcome, Joseph. Nice to see you. And Trig. Hello, Trig. Good to see you in the audience. And Val. Welcome, Val. Val says, hey, y'all. Headed to help the senior center to help with their Seder. Hope everyone has a great day. Me too. I hope everyone has a great day too. And God bless you for going to a senior center to help with the Seder. I've done that a couple of times myself, and I know they always appreciate it, as do I. Trig asks, I'm attending my first community Seder at our shul. Is there blessing? Are there blessings or prayers I should be aware of before going? I'm going to say that there are so many blessings and prayers that go along with Passover. I hesitate to tell you to learn them all before you go. I would just go into it with an open mind and kind of follow along with the service and just sort of absorb everything instead of worrying about particular blessings and things like that. Just go with an open mind. There are going to be a lot of people there who are learning. Even people who've been to Seders before many, many times are still learning throughout their life on how the Seder goes. So I would just say don't, worry about memorizing or learning any particular things. Just go with an open mind. The Seder itself is designed to be an educational process. So absorb things as you go. Be mindful of, what page they're on in the Haggadah if they're following a book and things like that. I would just don't worry too much about, doing it right before you get there. Go, open your mind, follow along with what people are doing, and absorb it as you go. And then every year you'll learn a little something new. And again, the Seder is designed to be an educational experience. There are questions built into it, but also questions that are sparked, curiosity that is sparked by all the weird things that we do. The different parts of the Seder are different for a reason, in the sense that, we have these 4 questions in the Magid section. Why is this night different from all other nights? Why do we eat matzah and not chametz? Why do we dip our vegetables in salt water? Why do we recline? Why do we do all sorts of strange things? And all of those strange things are there to get you to ask those questions. Why do we do these strange things? Because once, let's say, your brain has been plowed, like in terms of, this is a terrible metaphor, like the soil of your brain has been plowed with curiosity, you are much more open and receptive to the learning that goes on. So go to the Seder with an open mind. Learn things as you go. Don't worry about doing things wrong. People will guide you in the right way, and I hope you have a fantastic time. Chad asks, Rabbi, is there a list somewhere of things I can and can't eat during the 8 days? So yes, there is. We talked a little bit about this in our Ask Me Anything About Passover. I think we got into that just kind of on a high level. You shouldn't eat things that are made of wheat or barley or spelt or oats or, what's that last one? Rye. I always forget rye. I don't know why I forget rye. But I would recommend websites like myjewishlearning.com. I'm pretty sure Chabad would have some resources as well, chabad.org. My favorite guide is the Rabbinical Assembly Passover Guide. So if you Google Rabbinical Assembly Passover Guide, every year they put out a fresh PDF that guides you through the things you can eat and can't eat. Plus some additional things that some people don't eat, like kitniot, corn, beans, things like that. So that has not only a very concise list of things that you can and cannot eat, but it also tells you how to prepare for all sorts of different things like How do I regard my dishes and pots and pans, and how do I clean all the hametz out of my house? My favorite thing is that it has a great introduction by, the Gadol Hador, the great one of our generation, Rabbi Elliot Dorff. And I'll say the great one for a lot of generations. That's just my personal opinion. But Rabbi Elliot Dorff writes the introduction to that. I think maybe after this is over, I'll put a link to that in the notes to this video so everybody can find it. But just go to, just Google Rabbinical Assembly Passover Guide, and maybe type in 5779 or 2019, something like that, just for the current year one, and you should be able to find that available for anybody to download. And that's my favorite resource for this. Let's see what else is going on here. Looking for some more questions. Oh, this is a great one. Going back to ancient days. David Alvarado asks, hello, Rabbi, who is us when God said, let us make man in our own image? This has been a head scratcher for rabbis going back a long time. And of course, if you know rabbis, you know that there are multiple answers to this question. So people were kind of baffled by this. They said, okay, I thought we were like monotheists, So when we have to be able to answer the question when people come around and ask this, like Dave did today, who is this us business when God says, let us make man in our image? And so different things have arisen. I believe it was probably Ibn Ezra, who was a medieval commentator, and I say probably Ibn Ezra because he was a bit of a grammarian, noted that Elohim, one of the Hebrew names for God, is a plural collective noun. And so while, if you look at the very first sentence of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim, it goes on, when God created the universe. Bara is a verb that is in the singular form, and it's a special verb that is only used when God is the subject of that verb. Like humans don't bara, only God baras, right? That's a singular verb, and Elohim is a plural noun. However, there are other examples of that in Hebrew. Ma'im, the word for water, is actually waters. The word for heaven, shamayim, is actually heavens. And so there are various instances in Hebrew of things that are sort of collective singular being spelled out in the plural. Chaim, the word for life, is also plural, like lives. And so various places, one could just consider this an irregular word. And what I learned in language class many years ago is that the more common a word is, the more likely its grammar is to be irregular. For example, conjugate the verb to be in English has the most, is, was, were, will be, has the most irregular conjugation there is. So that's the grammatical answer. Another answer, I believe this was given by Rashi, another medieval commentator, who said that God is speaking to the heavenly hosts, right? The sort of army of angels, or the court in heaven there. And so when God is saying, let us make man in our image, God is speaking to divine beings and setting an example for manners for leaders in generations to come. God doesn't need to ask anybody's permission, right? This sort of let us sounds sort of cohortative or suggestive. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we made man in our image? Now, God didn't have to put it that way. So why did God? And Rashi says that what God is doing there is showing, let's say, modesty or humility, even in the presence of the ones who serve God. And who is the top of the chain there is no question. But when you are a leader, when you have authority, when you have dominion, it's still nice to say to those people who are in your charge, let's do this. Let's do this together. Wouldn't it be nice if we did this, right? And that's rather than just kind of bossing people around, right? And so that's, I believe, what Rashi says about that. Some people also look at maybe this is the royal we, like when the Queen of England says, let us have a, knighting ceremony. That was my Queen impression. I'm not sure. I could start singing Bohemian Rhapsody. That would be another Queen impression, but that's a different thing altogether. Let's see. What are the questions we have? Carla asks, do you have a resource for people who can't fully participate in Passover this year? I may need you to be a little bit more specific about that in terms of can you what's the borderline of partial participation? I could guess, but I want to answer the question that's being asked. So I'll come back to that one. Good to see Dodie. Dorothy Sue is here in the audience. Miriam asks, talking about ancient stuff, if all the festivals have pagan origins, why are those celebrated versus other things that aren't because they are pagan? So let's get into that. This is something that you see in, I'll say, ecclesiology all the time. Maybe that's not the right word for that. But when people are putting together religions, right? When people are putting together religious practice, a common method is to take something that is familiar and fuse it with something that is new. And so people often give the example of Christmas not necessarily being exactly at the birthday of whom that celebrates, but being attached to the winter solstice or Saturnalia or some other pre-existing festival that is then co-opted and has additional layers of meaning added to it to help it catch on. And similarly, you could say that each of the Shalosh Regalim, each of the pilgrimage festivals, have something to do with the natural agricultural cycle, in the sense that Passover is a spring festival, Shavuot is an early summer festival, and Sukkot is a fall festival. Each of these connected to the timing of a particular harvest in Canaan, in the Holy Land, in the Promised Land from back in the day. And Passover most likely coinciding with the barley harvest. They say that Shavuot is the late spring, early summer wheat harvest, and Sukkot is the vegetable harvest. And when our calendar was being given to us, there's a lot of details about in the book of Exodus and again in Leviticus, that we had these holy occasions that were timed with these festivals. And that's, in my mind, the best reason for doing this is take something that people were already doing and infuse it with additional significance. People were already getting together to celebrate spring. Let's talk about the springtime of our people. That is, this redemption and rebirth, just as green shoots are coming up out of the ground for the first time after a long winter, and new children are being born, new babies, animals are being born, all sorts of things are being renewed and refreshed. This is the renewal of our people being rescued from slavery in Egypt and becoming a new nation. And as it happens, the spring wheat harvest is approximately 7 weeks after Passover, and we think maybe it took about 7 weeks to get from Egypt to Sinai to receive the Torah. And so that's when we have this celebration of the receiving of the gift of the Torah. Likewise, in the fall, when we have the vegetable harvest, this is the time of year where our gratitude is most abundant, but we are also most likely to be reminded of the tenuousness of our existence. So even when we're celebrating our abundance during the vegetable harvest, which, if you're a farmer, and I'm not, is when you are the richest throughout the year. But sometimes that harvest is good, and sometimes that harvest is bad, and you just have to wait and see. And that's when we're reminded that when we were traveling through the wilderness, that's when we most depended on the grace and the generosity and the protection of God. And so that's what we remember on Sukkot. So yes, these festivals may have had some pagan origins before they became Jewish holidays. I'm not a betting man, and luckily there's no way to verify this. I would bet that even those pagan festivals were probably added to pre-existing agricultural cycles, right? It wasn't that, okay, we're going to have a pagan festival, and by the way, let's pick some wheat. It's that this is the natural order of the world, that barley comes out in spring, wheat comes out a little bit later, vegetables come out in the fall. And so I would think of it less as replacing pagan holidays as tying momentous events in our history to the natural turning of the globe. And you could look at this skeptically, like, okay, let's celebrate things when people are together celebrating anyway. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's just a smart way to get people to observe these things and use these occasions to tell our story. So I'm not less worried about the pagan origins, even more so when we had animal sacrifices. It wasn't because God needed to eat. It's because God saw that we were living among people who sacrificed animals to their deities, and had God wanted to order religion in a completely different way, we may not have accepted it. We may not have understood what to do. And that's why Maimonides says that, we copied some practices, but we changed them in significant ways to rob them of their idolatry. And so that's just how humans learn. We're not born perfect, and we're not robots. And so God teaches us in ways that we can accept when we can accept them. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not too worried about paganism on Passover per se. I'm a little bit worried about digestive trouble for matzah. I think that's a more pressing concern. So I'm going to go back to Carla's question just because it looks like she's clarified it a little more. One sec. So Carla asks, do you have a resource for people who can't fully participate in Passover this year? For example, she says, I have places for Seder if I can, but not sure how to make the other days work. So it's a little bit, I've always thought of it a little bit like camping, in the sense that, okay, it's easier to celebrate Passover when you're going to somebody's house and they're making a big dinner and everything's kind of kosher for Passover, but how do you keep Passover for the rest of the week? And you stock up on matzah, you stock up on some other things, and it's tough when, let's say, you work in an office building where other people aren't necessarily keeping kosher, and you're brown bagging it that week. Maybe normally you might go out to lunch, get a sandwich with your friends. For a week, you're bringing matzah. For a week, you're having maybe your own coffee in a thermos versus the office coffee machine or something like that. So there are ways around it. It takes a little practice, but it's just imagine you have just left Egypt with only what you can carry, and you don't have the conveniences that you've become accustomed to. And for that week, you do things a little bit different. You eat some cereal that tastes terrible, in my opinion. The Passover breakfast cereal is one of the worst foods on earth, as far as I'm concerned. So I know I said that about eggplant earlier this week, but Passover cereal, I say, is worse than even eggplant. But it's only for a week. And so what you do is what you have to do. And, if you make mistakes, you make mistakes. That's okay. Every year is a new opportunity to learn and grow. But for me, it's a little bit like camping. Like, I'm going to take all the do all my shopping for the week. I don't eat fast food. I don't have conveniences like I normally have, but it's only for a week, and then I get through it. And then I have some pizza and beer and say, I'm not doing this again for another year. And that's okay because nobody else is either. And so I think that's the best advice I have. If you can't, if you don't have access to all of those resources, vegetables are kosher for Passover. There are all sorts of raw ingredients that are kosher for Passover. And it's just sort of a weekly diet. If you don't have access to, let's say, cleaning and there's chametz everywhere, you do your best. You do your best to get the chametz out of your life. You don't have to worry necessarily about public places. Let's say if you work in an office and there's going to be chametz everywhere, that's not necessarily your responsibility. And so with all these things, you do your best. And you literally can't do better than that. And every year is an opportunity to grow. I hope that's helpful for you. Miriam asks, do they still wipe? Miriam asks, do they still swipe crumbs with a feather onto a spoon and in the dark, which is used more a candle or flashlight? So this is a custom called bedikat chametz, often done the night before Passover. It's I'm not going to lie to you, it looks a little bit like an Easter egg hunt when I've seen it done. It's something you can do with children, but not just children. Adults do this as well. People will often take a wooden spoon and a feather. First they'll place little croutons, or little bits of bread around the house so that, even after you do your Passover cleaning, this is a sort of symbolic final Passover cleaning where you place little pieces of bread around the house and then have somebody go look for them. Traditionally, this was done by candlelight because this tradition goes back before flashlights existed. So if it's safer for you to use a flashlight, use a flashlight. If you feel like you can use a candle, do that too. But it's one more way to really make sure you're getting the chametz out of your house. And then specifically that chametz that you gather is what you use the next day for biur chametz, of burning it, let's say, in a fire pit or on a grill or something like that. So yes, this is still done. If you live close to a kosher grocery store, I've even seen bedikat chametz kits where, people will sell you anything. And so they'll sell you this plastic wrapped kit of a spoon and a feather and maybe a candle and individually wrapped and numbered cubes of bread. And they're wrapped so that none of the crumbs get out and you have to worry about that. William asks, is it a mitzvah to buy your spouse a new dress and jewelry for Pesach? I'll say, if your spouse has told you this, then yes, it is. But that's just me trying to score points. No, it's not that I know of. If people want to dress up nice for Passover, go ahead and dress up nice for Passover. But that's not a custom that I'm familiar with. And I also love that Kathy has shared with Carla, one can say the blessing that nullifies the chametz, right? If you can't get rid of all the chametz in your house, if it's just not possible, if you're in a situation where, you're away from home, you're coming back during Pesach, you haven't had a chance to clean stuff out, it is still possible. This goes back to Talmud Masechet Pesachim. You can still look for chametz during Pesach. Then this was a debate among rabbis. Are you allowed to look for chametz during Pesach if for whatever reason you weren't able to clean out your house before Pesach? And one rabbi says, no, you absolutely not, because if you look for chametz during Pesach, you might eat it. You might say, oh, there's some chametz. And this other rabbi said, that's ridiculous. Like, why would you look for chametz during Pesach in order to eat chametz, right? You are specifically looking for that chametz to get rid of it. So according to this opinion, if you find chametz during Pesach, it's not like, oh, I failed Pesach, I'll try again next year. No, if you find chametz during Pesach, you can still get rid of chametz during Pesach. Just don't eat it, right? Likewise, if you are in an office building or something and other people have chametz, that's not your home. You're not responsible for that necessarily. And so, you you do you. Like, you practice your discipline as best you can. You nullify the chametz that's in your possession as best you can. If you find chametz during Pesach, you can still get rid of it then, and that's okay. All right, looks like Ruthie's joined us. Welcome, Ruthie. Glad to have you here. Michael Pacheco asks, how do you justify selling chametz? I feel like it's lying to Hashem. You're selling it with the intention to buy it back. So are you really selling it? So this was a workaround, and I'm not going to lie, it is a bit of a legal fiction. It's not about lying to Hashem, because there is no lying to Hashem, in my opinion. That's like when people say, well, I don't believe in God. And I'll say, do you believe in gravity? Because, gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. But then likewise, there is no lying to Hashem, because Hashem can't have things concealed. So it's not dishonest per se, but it was an acknowledgement by the rabbis many, many years ago that we're human beings with human lives, and we're not perfect, and sometimes we need a little help. And so, for example, if you own a bar and you own, in that bar, you own several kegs of beer and several cases of whiskey, and it's impractical for you to either drink it all, God forbid, or have like a fire sale, or dump all that stuff out, because, after Passover, when you open it back up again, you will have gotten rid of, thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of stock, and it could put you out of business. Right? And God doesn't want us to be, let's say, unemployed or unemployable, or ruin ourselves financially so that we can't sustain our families. And so all of halakha, in my opinion, is the interface between our holiest selves and our human needs. And we can't be saints all the time. We have to feed ourselves. We have to feed our families and support our communities. And so what to some people look like legalisms and workarounds and cheating and that kind of stuff is the acknowledgement by the rabbis look, if we make being Jewish impossible, we're more likely to chase people away from doing it, right? If we make it impossible, then people are going to just chuck the whole system. And I don't think that's what God wants. It's just in this guy's opinion. And so we have a legal arrangement whereby for the week of Passover, we don't own any chametz. And so we sell it to somebody who is allowed to own it, with the stipulation that we're going to buy it back right afterwards. And so we're just transferring ownership in a way that allows us to observe Passover without giving up our livelihoods, without throwing away food that could be used later. And so I really appreciate I appreciate the question. I got this question in one of my Intro to Judaism classes that I teach here in Los Angeles. There seem to be a lot of cheats. There seem to be a lot of workarounds and these weird little legal fictions and things like that seem to make Judaism look kind of silly to some people from the outside. However, I feel like it's way sillier to expect people to be perfect, and people won't be. And so why are you setting up a system that people can't abide by? It's much better to have a system that can be lived by human beings while we aspire to greatness. Chad B. asks, do Reform and conservative Jews observe the dietary restrictions differently during the 8 days? Probably. And I'll say even within the Reform community and within the conservative community, there are spectrums of observance of the dietary restrictions. Again, not a betting man, willing to bet there are differences within the Orthodox community. There's probably a range of observations of the dietary restrictions during the 8 days. And so, yes, there are, yes, on average, you can find that maybe conservative households are on average stricter than Reform households, and Orthodox households are on average stricter. But I want to stipulate here that stricter doesn't necessarily mean more correct. It just means stricter. More is not always better when it comes to observing Jewish law. That is a myth and a common human tendency. Nevertheless, if you're talking about how many, what's the length of the list of rules that you follow, there's probably a longer list in Orthodox households, a slightly shorter list in conservative households, slightly shorter list in Reform households. But again, that's probably an average. That's an assumption that I'm making. And I know there are probably Reform Jews who are way stricter about You could probably, so I'm willing to bet you could find a Reform Jew who is stricter about Passover than, let's say, a lot of Orthodox Jews that you know. So you can't really make those assumptions. You could just ask individuals how they observe things. But I will say what I found interesting is that there are people who do not. What I will say is what I found interesting, that there are people of all stripes who don't necessarily observe the dietary restrictions at all during the year, who on Passover become super strict in their kashrut, because that's what Passover is. Because that's a lot of what Passover is about, is a special care for our diet. So people might eat ham sandwiches all year long, and then on Passover, they go to the strictest observance of kashrut for Passover, right? And so that happens as well. Let's see. Looking for more questions here. Miriam's asking about some variations, I'll say, on the traditional Seder, but I say that advisedly because in my mind and in my observation, variations on Passover are native to Passover, right? The varying from the tradition is a tradition often on Passover, because she's asking about what else represents, let's say, the fifth cup. Sometimes we have the kos Eliyahu, like a cup of wine put out for Elijah the prophet, because we hope that Passover is going to herald Olam Haba. But on many people's tables, there's also a kos Miriam, a Miriam's cup, which is filled with water. And the reason it's filled with water is that Miriam was considered sort of the matriarch or the steward of water for Bnei Israel traveling through the wilderness. It's said that as long as Miriam lived with the people in the wilderness, they were always able to dig a well and find water. But when Miriam passed away, they had a much harder time finding water. So Miriam was considered kind of the embodiment of accessibility to water when our people needed it. And so now to this day today many people have a kos Miriam, or a cup of water, on their Passover table. Let's see. People often talk about cups for Shoah victims, or some acknowledgement of people who were taken from us wrongly too soon. For people who are living under oppression. There are other symbols for commitment to Israel. Sometimes people put an orange on their Seder plate, which has a bit of a story to it that connects to egalitarianism in modern Judaism, in recognizing the capacity and the strength of leadership of women in the liberal Jewish movements, and more in the Orthodox Jewish world as well. But all of these things go to how do I want to put this? But all of these things are data, are pieces of evidence that we get to be creative with our Seders. Yes, the word Seder itself means order, and the Haggadah lists 14 distinct things that you're supposed to do, and the Seder plate has to have certain things on it. However, on these scales, you can play jazz. On these, the structure, we are invited to be creative in whatever ways engender others' curiosity, because in every generation, it's on us to retell this story in a way that people in our generation can understand. And that's going to require some creativity. It always has, and I think it always will. So however you can make the Seder your own, in a way that sparks questions from other people, in a way that passes it on to children in a way that they're going to be interested in. And it's harder and harder to get kids' attention these days, competing with video games and Fortnite and whatnot. Whatever you can do that makes it more interesting to you and makes it more interesting to the people at the table and makes it more curious for people to ask questions about, I'll say game on. So, I like it within a traditional framework, but however you want to add to your Seder in a way that makes you recognize your freedom, that makes you more conscious of people who are not yet free, is perfectly appropriate. So before I go to another question, I just wanted to declare a discovery that I made this week. I don't know if there are any Metallica fans out there. I'm one. I just discovered a Metallica song. I was going back through their catalog and found a song called "Creeping Death," which sounds about like a title of a Metallica song. But I was listening to it for the first time and heard a lot of discussion of Egypt and Moses and things like that. And then I went and looked up the lyrics. And this is, as far as I can tell, a Passover song. It's done by Metallica. The Creeping Death actually is the Malach HaMashchit, the sort of destroying angel visage of God that went through Egypt and took the firstborn of the Egyptians and passed over our firstborn. That's what the title Creeping Death is about. So if you're a Metallica fan and you've been looking for a heavy metal Passover song, check that out. You can find it on YouTube and wherever fine Metallica songs are found. So I just saw a question about pizza in here, so I'm going to hit that one. 1 second. William asks, it was announced this morning that my office is having a pizza party during Pesach, and what if they hand me a slice of pizza or place a donut on my desk or try to hand it to me? What I found really interesting is that people don't get kashrut. Like people don't get, oh, I'm not eating certain things for religious reasons, but they get dieting, right? You can if somebody hands you a slice of pizza and you say, no, I'm religiously forbidden from eating pizza this week, they'll look at you weird. However, if you say to them, I'm on a diet this week, I'm not eating pizza, they're like, oh, I get diets, right? If I say, well, I'm not eating meat because I follow the diet of, Leviticus, they'll say, oh, you're a religious weirdo. But if I say I'm a vegetarian or I'm a vegan, people are like, oh, I get vegans. Like I know vegans. And so they don't question that at all. And so often what you can do if you feel like your religious reasons won't be well received is just say, that's not something I'm eating right now. And, or I'm just taking a break from pizza and donuts this week. I think most people would understand that because I think, at least in the United States of America, most of us can take a break from pizza and donuts, and nobody would look at us funny because I think everybody could use less pizza and donuts, frankly. And I say that as a big fan of both pizza and donuts. Like I said, that's my go-to meal right after Pesach is a slice of pizza and a bottle of beer. When okay, I'm seeing a new person in the seeing I think a new person in the chat. AM says sup from Iowa. Sup AM. What are your favorite Passover recipes? No clue what to cook. No clue what to cook without pasta and bread. So pasta and bread. They say bread is the staff of life, and pasta is popular. Pasta is popular all over the world. How do we get by without these particular carbohydrates? Again, I'll just say, look, it's only for a week. So if you're looking for a cookbook, I'm sure there are Passover cookbooks out there. Paleo diet, cookbooks are good as well. Some of my favorite Passover recipes I've shared, matzah pizza. You just take matzah, put some kosher for Passover spaghetti sauce and mozzarella on top, throw that in the toaster oven, throw it in the oven, microwave in a pinch. That's one of my go-to staples. There's every year in my house, we prepare what I found many years ago, the Emerald Lagasse Passover brisket recipe. And so if you just Google Emeril Lagasse, he was a famous TV chef a few years ago, has an outstanding spicy Passover brisket recipe. You can find kosher for Passover substitutes for all of those ingredients that he lists, but just Google it. Brisket's popular. If you're not a meat eater, there's lots of other things you can do. Lots of great potato dishes. Potatoes are fine for Passover. So just look for things as, nowadays you can Google recipes with words like keto or paleo. Both of those are low carb to no carb diets and have lots of, let's say, satisfying substitutes for our normal favorite starches. So that's one way to go. Miriam asks, do people still take pots and pans to the mikveh? So yes, that is sometimes done. People do take pots and pans to the mikveh, and you're like, that's where people go. Why are you putting your pots and pans in there? Well, you wash them before you put them in, and then you wash them again afterwards, and that's fine. More often, when people are taking their pots and pans to dip them in a mikveh, it's to change their status from not kosher to kosher. So if you're wanting to keep kosher or you're changing over from a non-kosher kitchen to a kosher kitchen, what is often done is you can take existing pots and pans, you clean them, you leave them, unused for 24 hours, and you can dip them in the mikveh. And this is one way that people said, okay, we're distinguishing from their prior use. It's not like the mikveh magically makes them kosher. It's more, we put them in the mikveh to mark that transition from before this point, these were not used for kosher food. After this point, they will only be used for kosher food. This is less for Pesach, I'll say. It's more for changing over from a non-kosher kitchen to a kosher kitchen. For Passover, so for Passover, presumably your dishes are already kosher in some way, and then you kosher them for Passover. And for metal pots and pans, you can do this with heat or boiling water. Ceramic dishes, not so much. You're going to need to get different dishes or glass dishes for that, but you don't necessarily need a mikveh to fix your stuff for Passover if they're already kosher. Fernando saying, good afternoon from NYC. Glad to see you here, Fernando. Let's see. I saw Suzanne says, I have a rabbi that will sell my chametz. Suzanne says, I have a rabbi that I will sell my chametz to. For those on here that don't have a rabbi to sell their chametz to, will you sell it for them? So I haven't thought about this, but now I'm going to think about this. So let me get back to you. I think for the sake of people who don't have a rabbi locally, which is a lot of people that I teach, I'm going to figure out how to sell chametz, and maybe we can get that done. So let me first make sure I have a good person to sell it to, and then I'll set up some kind of form or something online to sell chametz. But bli neder, let me figure out how to do that first, and as soon as I figure out how to do that, we'll hook that up. Kathy also shares for the Passover recipes. Look on YouTube. Lots of cooking demos for Passover on YouTube. YouTube, not for nothing, is one of my favorite educational resources. I learned a ton from YouTube. I learned how to make better YouTube videos from YouTube. I'm still learning how to do that. But so any kind of question you have, especially when it comes to cooking, there's all sorts of great stuff on YouTube. William, I think vis-a-vis my Metallica recommendation, William also shares there is a Jam and Exodus song by Bob Marley. So I think that's another good Passover song. Anything from the Exodus album, really. Ruthie shares, I'm going to my first community Seder for second night on Saturday. Can't wait. I can't wait either. I'm also going to one of those. So Ruthie, glad that you're going to that. Miriam shares, love the song by ABBA. I don't know if is there an ABBA Passover song? So I'll have to check that out. Maybe make a whole Passover playlist. You don't often get to have ABBA and Bob Marley and Metallica on the same mixtape, but I'm willing to try. Listen, everybody, this has been a fantastic session. We're coming up on the hour, so thank you for literally asking me anything. We had some great questions today, so I'm going to do a little bit of a podcast wrap up here before we go. One sec. Just got to clear out the pipes. Heroes in the studio audience, thank you for all these great questions today. Whenever I say ask me anything, you do indeed ask me anything, stuff I wouldn't have thought of to teach, but it's most important for me to teach the stuff that you actually want to know about. So thank you for doing this today, and thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. Once again, if you'd like to be in the studio audience for an upcoming session, please visit me on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, search for Rabbi John Carrier, and you will see all of our upcoming live learning opportunities where you can jump in and ask your questions about the topic at hand or anything at all on YouTube Live, and your questions will then help Jew Curious people just like you learn on the Jew Curious Show. One last recommendation I'd like to make. If you'd like to connect with these people who are Jew Curious just like you are, check out jewcurious.show/JCC, as in the Jew Curious Community Center. This is a private Facebook group that is lovingly tended, carefully guarded, troll-free, for you to meet people just like you who are Jew curious. You can go there to ask questions. You can go there to share your story. You can go there to share support with other people who are on their journey. And the way to do that is check out jewcurious.show/JCC. Sign up there and you will get instructions on how to join this growing community of Jew curious people just like you. It has been my great honor to learn with you today, and until next time, Hero, peace. All right, everybody, thank you so much for doing this with me today. Love hanging out with you and love the great questions that you are asking. William says, try Passover kosher salmon with avocado and olives with hummus on your matzah. Yum, yum. You know, hummus, not necessarily for people who are observing kitniot, but if you're not worried about kitniot, garbanzo beans are back on the menu, y'all. And we've got a great playlist going here as well. And so now I think what I'm going to spend my afternoon doing is figuring out how to maybe sell your chametz through my website. So stay tuned for that. I'll make some sort of announcement tomorrow on our live. What I'm going to do is go through these and see if there are some things I want to expand on during the week. Don't have any live sessions for this week listed right now, but God willing, before the end of today, you'll know what's happening for the rest of the week on this channel. Always a pleasure to learn with you live. And until next time, heroes, peace.